Well, we thank Frank for his insights and send our best wishes to Finland. Together with Frank, we looked at sustainability through the eyes of a CEO. I invite you now to a discussion where we change the perspective and we look at the topic through the eyes of the ECB. The discussion will be facilitated by my esteemed colleague Alexandre Meimer, Chief Audit Executive of Société Générale. Alexandre was appointed Head of Inspection and the Audit function in July this year. He began his career at the Ministry of Economy and Finance in 1992. Alexandre.
It's a long time ago.
And then you joined Société Générale in 2001, and since then you have taken on a lot of roles. And I do not want to mention everything, but just a few things. You have been heading up the banking operation in Cameroon, and you were the head of the retail banking for Africa. And before you rejoined audit, I have to say you were the head of global transaction and payment services. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Andrea. Good morning to each of you. I have the honor to welcome Mr. Patrick Annis. Mr. Annis, good morning to you. You are the head of the Directorate General Specialized Institutions and Less Significant Institutions at the European Central Bank, entrusted with the direct supervision of 50 significant banks and the oversight of the less significant institutions within the European Single Supervision Mechanism. You are also in charge of the integration of climate-related risk into the European Central Bank's supervisory approach. Before your current position, you had a long-lasting experience as bank's supervisor. You joined the ECB in March 2014 as Deputy General Director at the Directorate General Microprudential Supervision 1, responsible for the direct supervision of the 30 largest and most complex financial institutions of the Eurozone. Before joining the ECB, you had a supervisory career in the Banque de France, beginning in 1995, where you took different positions on supervision and prudential policy. You also chaired working groups on accounting, both in the Basel Committee and in the Committee of European Banking Supervisors. You were Deputy General Secretary of this committee from 2008 to 2010. Mr. Annis, the floor is yours.
Bonjour à tous. Hi everyone. Are you hearing me okay? Because I have zero sound from the room. So I'm not completely sure whether I can be heard right now.
We hear you.
Okay, very good. So many thanks for inviting me. I wanted to start this with this very interesting event, and I think very critical for us as banking supervisors, with a quick reminder of where we stand in our supervision of climate-related and environmental risks, and I would like to start with our roadmap. If we can move to the next slide, please. that I suppose is already well known by now, but I think it's always good to come back to it, because this is really how we have been looking at this topic for quite some years now. We started in 2020 with the publication of the ECB guide on climate-related and environmental risks, laying down a number of expectations for the banks to incorporate this risk into their risk management, risk appetite, strategies, governance frameworks. And we have been very much intent from this day on, to make sure that banks would implement these expectations. Important to mention that these expectations have been grounded on existing regulatory environments, so we did not anticipate any regulation at that time. We asked in 2021 banks to provide us with a self-assessment of where they were standing with respect to our expectations, as published in November 2020, and to develop implementation plans to come closer to our expectations. Importantly enough, when we asked banks to give us implementation plans, around 80% of them anticipated at that time that they could be and would be over with their plans by the end of 2024, and I will come back to this in a second. We followed in 2022 with two very important initiatives. The first one, was the supervisory climate risk stress test, and the second one, a thematic review on climate-related and environmental risks. We also had a few targeted reviews on commercial real estate and the incorporation of climate risks into commercial real estate lending, and a few dedicated pilot on-site inspections. Out of the stress test and the thematic review, we provided a number of remediation requests to the banks, with remediation timelines that were essentially attuned to what we had received from the banks in 2021, and in a number of cases already a few qualitative requirements in the SREP as binding decisions. In 23 and 24, we plan to continue monitoring banks' remediation and shortcomings and implementation plans. And we said quite some time ago already that we would take enforcement actions as needed. We will continue, of course, running a number of targeted deep dives on the topic, and in parallel, we are working on the progressive implementation of these risks into our SREP process. And in 24-25, we will continue, of course, with incorporation of the new regulatory requirements into our supervisory practices and frameworks, of course, together with our colleagues in the EBA. If we can move to the next slide, and I will be perhaps a little bit faster here. We have seen in our thematic review in 2022 that essentially banks have been making progress compared to our initial assessment and their initial plans in 2021. As you can see, we have now a reasonable number of banks that have made progress, and we can say that around 80%, 85% of the banks have now at least basic practices in place, and we know that they continue improving and evolving over time. We also can see that we have a number of banks paving the way for leading practices in a number of areas, and we see that a number of banks are doing already in their day-to-day life, are putting in place a number of very interesting practices. And this is, of course, a very comforting thought that if some banks can do it, it means that all other ones should be able to do it as well. Let's move to the next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. We see that also more than 80% of the banks deem today that they are materially exposed to climate-related and environmental risks, with 70% seeing material risks within the next 3 to 5 years. And we see as well that banks that deploy a variety of assessment approaches appear to have a better gauge of risks. We still see, however, that many banks significantly underestimate the breadth and magnitude of these risks, with blind spots in the identification of risk in these key sectors or geographies, and also a number of banks that have not yet deployed a comprehensive coverage of the risk analysis. Let's move to the next slide. We have seen as well from the 2022 stress test that today banks' balance sheets continue to depend, and net interest income continue to depend very, very much on carbon-intensive sectors, which means that it is critical that the industry in itself, on its own, really start looking at how to progress with respect to transition planning. We see that loss projections stemming from the exercise were already projected at an aggregate of 70 billion over 3 short-term exercises. Important to mention that these exercises were rather limited in scope, and we see a number of banks significantly understating or underestimating the actual risk. And we see as well that nearly 60% of the banks at that time had not integrated yet climate risks into their own stress testing framework. Let's move to the next slide. We also wanted, out of the guide, we wanted to also end the stress testing exercise to put forward a number of good practices that we have seen in the banks. We believe it is very important that we can also provide what we regard as good practices. We don't think we can yet label them best practices. Practices are still evolving, but we have already quite a number of good developments that we are seeing from a number of banks when we look at them individually, and we thought that it would be good to put this forward on the different risk areas, from governance strategy and risk management setting to stress testing, and also, of course, to disclosures. And we will endeavor to update these good practices over time to also give food for thought for the industry as a whole. Let's move to the last slide. Just to remind that in November 2022, when we published the outcome of the thematic review and the stress test, we did send to the banks a number of operational letters setting specific requests for improvements and a number of deadlines. And these deadlines have been arranged around 3 major milestones by March 23 with respect to business environment scanning and the assessment of materiality of climate risk, by N23 with respect to the inclusion in governance, strategy and risk management, and by N24 for the rest of our expectations, including on capital adequacy and stress testing. We said that when we would not see progress, we would start enforcing. and we have already seen that we needed to start the enforcement procedure for around 25 banks. This is currently ongoing for the first major milestone, the one by March 2023. Let me of course, mention that escalation will not be confined to climate-related and environmental risks. We have decided for the SSM that we would progressively broaden the use of our toolbox, so moving a little bit away from the pure capital sided supervisory action to make use also of the rest of the toolbox, including escalation and sanctions. And we start, of course, with climate-related and environmental risk, but that will broaden to other sectors and risks over time. Of course, we would prefer that we do not have to escalate. So hopefully we can have enough level of dialogue with the banks and make sure that we see how they progress and how fast they progress to avoid going for escalation. I would like to end with a call to the banks and also to the internal audit functions to reach out to their JSTs in case of doubt before these deadlines are passed to make sure that we do have appropriate dialogue before we need to start the escalation ladder. And of course, the JSTs are also reaching out to their banks to start this dialogue. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Amis, for this very clear and very comprehensive, I would say, vision and explanation of the ECB framework. I think that it is a clear illustration of the full contribution of the ECB towards the willingness of the European community to be at the forefront of this new economic paradigm towards greater sustainability and better respect of the earth. You have also clearly, I would say, indicated, how important is the role of the banking sector in moving, I would say, towards this new sustainability paradigm. You have also explained us, the tremendous effort that we have to do in the coming years to fully respect, I would say, the ECB framework. Allow me also to insist that it's true that it is a tremendous effort, but it's part of our pride of contributing to a better world. It is also for us a tremendous opportunity to participate in financing the very important investment that our clients will need to do to finance their own transition. So, but let's move to our questions, and I will begin by the first one. According to you, are European banks sustainable? And how to move climate-related and environmental risk management to the next level in bank strategies, governance, and risk management?
Yeah, many thanks. This is a very broad question, of course. I would like to start perhaps with one important topic. Nothing that we do should be construed as a call for banks to divest. When we mention that we still have 60% of the net interest income on the banking sector coming from carbon intensive sectors, we just want to, by this number, show that we need to see movement and we need to make sure that banks start planning for the transition as both physical and transition risks are increasing. And we all know that this increase, at least for physical risk, will be exponential. if we look at science. So it's important that we can see movement, and we are very pleased that we have seen the beginning of movement, and we see a number of banks actually taking steps to incorporate these risks into their strategies and risk appetite. So are European banks sustainable? I would say probably as of today, not yet, but we are seeing movement and we are seeing adaptation, and we very much hope that this will continue for the sector. It is indeed critical that the European banking sector can provide financing for broader transition needs. Of course, we address this for the time being only from a risk management hat. We are banking supervisors, but we are of course aware of broader strategies at the European level, and we work in tune with those while remaining within our banking supervision remit. So one important topic, I think, in this journey is really the role of the management bodies in the banks. We believe it is absolutely critical that climate-related and environmental risks find their way up to management bodies. We see too often that strong difficulties in banks come from governance deficiencies and ultimately from the inefficiency of management bodies in the way they organize themselves and work. So it is for us the top priority to make sure that these type of risks, like any other kind of risk factor, is embedded into management body discussions, and that we have effective setting of priorities at management body level, also for climate-related risks. It goes, of course, with the design of responsibilities and reporting frameworks, also the design of performance and risk indicators, and also, at the end of the day, compensation policies, and the design of appropriate escalation arrangements. And of course, here the audit functions in banks play a crucial role.
Thank you very much for this very comprehensive answer. Let's move to the second questions. You know, based on the review of the internal audit functions, you mentioned that the responsibility of the third line of defense is sometimes unclear. Can you elaborate? What should we improve?
Yeah, many thanks. It's of course a very important question for you as internal auditors. I think we believe that the first and key element, of course, is the need to allocate clear responsibilities to the internal audit functions. And when we look more deeply at internal audit functions in banks, we have seen, of course, a number of very good things, and the basics are in place, obviously. But we see a number of cases where we could still see improvements. For instance, in the monitoring of remediations, I think we tend to be a little bit fire and forget in our practice, both as banking supervisors, and this is why we want also to broaden our toolbox and go a little bit more into escalation to make sure that our findings are being followed up. That means as well that we need probably to reduce and concentrate and prioritize our findings and requests to the banks. But the same is true probably for the internal audit functions in banks, putting, of course, appropriate emphasis on the monitoring of remediation actions is a key element we would like to see being developed further by internal audit functions. The second element is really the importance of clearly established reporting lines to audit committees in management bodies in their supervisory functions. So giving access to the supervisory boards and the audit committees in supervisory boards is something where we would like to see still a little bit of progress in terms of unfiltered access, in terms of involvement in the nomination, compensation, performance reviews of internal audit functions, and of course, in terms of staffing of the internal audit functions. The last point where we see a need for improvement is really on reviewing how comprehensive the risk taxonomy for climate-related and environmental risk is, and also the coverage of banks' policies and practices with respect to geographies, subsidiaries, branches. That's not always completely ensured. And finally, more importantly, we would like to make sure that climate-related and environmental risks do not stay within the second and third line of defense, but find their way in the first line of defense. We believe that a successful integration and execution of banks' plans and aspirations with respect to these risks will be successful only if they find their way in the daily practices of the first line. And this is something where we would like to see the internal audit function play also a larger role in analyzing exceptions, for instance, to policies. We see a number of net zero policies. When we dig further into banks' practices, we see a lot of exceptions, sometimes not well documented, sometimes where there could be more information from to the management body about these exceptions, the reason for it, the policies behind it, and so on and so forth. And we see again that there is a need for improvement in that field.
Thank you very much, Mr. Amis. You know, it is very, very clear, and you know, it gives us a very deep, I would say, roadmap to participate as internal audit to the, I would say, implementation, you know, of the ECB regulations, and to ensure that, you know, the first and the second line of defense are fully play their role in this transition towards sustainability. I'm afraid we are a little late, so we will have to skip the Q&A session that was forecasted. I'm sorry for that. So thank you very much for your contribution to this forum, and let's move to the next session